You're listening to WMPG 90.9 Gorham, Portland, Southern Maine Community Radio from USM. Live from the Orion Cygnus arm of the Milky Way galaxy, this is Scientifically Speaking, a weekly half-hour program devoted to elegant curiosities. And I am one of your hosts, Sarah Chang, and joining me as always is Bernie Rhyme, DJ Star Watcher. How are you, Bernie?
Yes, hi Sarah, very good, thank you.
Bernie's our professor of the astronomy lab at USM and our local protector of the night skies. Reach out to us at WMPG Scientifically Speaking at gmail.com or on Twitter at WMPG SciSpeak. And you can also head to WMPG.org to find the last 5 weeks of archives of all of your favorite shows, including this one. Bernie, could you let our listeners know what is up in the night sky for this coming week?
Yes, certainly, be glad to. Okay, this will be Friday, April 23rd, one day after Earth Day. So we're going to have a waxing gibbous moon just a few days before the full moon, so it'll basically look full tomorrow night already. So the full moon will be April 26th, and that'll be an interesting moon because that's the first supermoon of this year, 2021. It's also called the pink moon, not because of the color, it kind of looks reddish or orange when it comes up, but it's named after a wild ground phlox, which is pink, so the pink moon. And then, of course, you have the more traditional grass moon or egg moon. But look for that because it's going to be less than 1 day from perigee, so it'll be a little bit bigger in the sky if you can catch it right at moonrise. And so that's on the 26th, 3 more days. So the only evening planet is still Mars. It still sets about midnight. It's going in Taurus. It's just about to enter Gemini. Actually, tomorrow will enter the man-made boundary around the Gemini constellation, but it's still in Taurus right now. And then if you get up early, you'll see Jupiter and Saturn in the morning sky, and Venus should be getting ready to show up in the evening sky, but it'll still be very low, and you might need binoculars to see it. So we have a good week coming up.
Awesome. Thanks, Bernie.
You're welcome.
And if you couldn't take notes fast enough, you can also check out the monthly What's Up column in the Portland Press Herald. So as Bernie mentioned, yesterday, April 22nd, was Earth Day. And our guest today is a returning guest who is back for a PSA that every day should be Earth Day. Welcome to the show, Keith Launchbury.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to point out, it crossed my mind that I got married on Earth Day in 1992. So it's very appropriate that I'm talking about it on Earth Day because it's our wedding anniversary.
Well, happy anniversary.
Thank you.
Keith was here. You were actually our first guest of 2021 back in January. We had talked about supply chains and logistics, and we were so excited because today's topic is a passion of yours.
Yes.
Would you agree with that? Okay. So today's show is all about the circular economy. It's an important topic that I think everybody should learn more about and see how they can contribute to it. Bernie.
Yes.
Are you familiar with the terms linear economy and circular economy?
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, I did live on an organic farm for 3 years. So I learned a lot of new terms like slow food, slow money, all different recycling and fermenting and different things like that. So, yeah, I mean, not in great detail like Keith is, but yeah, I've heard it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that maybe a linear economy, a really simple way to describe it is a product is created, it's used, and then it is discarded. But a circular economy is probably something that I think there's a lot of ways that a circular economy can work. So I wonder if, Keith, given your work in logistics and experiences in supply chain, is the linear economy the correct way to describe possibly the primary economic process of product life cycles in the U.S.?
Yes. Unfortunately, I say yes, because we think about products from cradle to grave, from the day we invent the product to the day we throw it away. But most businesses consider the job is done when they ship the product to a customer who pays the bill. And the reality is that they are not on the hook for anything that happens after their product has been disposed of by the consumer. And so society pays the cost, not the consumer, not the individual, not the customer, not the company that's producing the product, but society pays the cost because we have to dispose of it in an environmentally safe manner, and we haven't done that. We basically put it into a landfill, and we just assume it's going to biodegrade over some period of time. But the problem is, if it's buried in a landfill, it's never going to deteriorate. It's never going to decompose. It's always going to be there. And the problem is that a lot of the things that we're producing today are packaged in convenience materials that are made of plastic. And it's single-use plastic. It's used once and disposed of. And that plastic will last 500 years in a landfill. And that's a problem that our future generations are going to have to deal with, because we are looking at a linear economy, not thinking of it like a circular economy. And let me give you a good example of a circle of supply chain, which would be water. You know, we cannot create water on this planet. We have to convert it from one form to another. So it evaporates from the oceans. It becomes water vapor. It becomes a cloud. The cloud rains. The rain is collected into streams that flow into rivers. The rivers flow back into the ocean. And the water just keeps going around and round. And we're not creating water. We're not consuming water. We're just replacing it through that circle. And that's what we need in business, is natural circles. But companies are not doing reverse manufacturing. They're not taking products that people are finished with and converting them back to raw materials so that people can reuse them. What they're doing is they're just discarding them and assuming that we live in an infinite world, and we don't. There's only one planet. This is the only planet that we've got. The nearest inhabitable planet to us, and Bernie, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, is in the Alpha Centauri solar system. You know, that's the closest. It's 4.6 light years away from us. Now, how on earth are we going to move the Earth's population to that planet 4.6 light years away? We don't have anywhere else to go. You know, and Mars is not really a viable option because you'd have to wear a spacesuit. It would be freezing cold. You know, there are lots of things. It's not an inhabitable planet like the Earth is. We live in a perfect place, but we're not treating it very well.
I'm curious about so I guess going back to the start of a linear economy. I mean, if I think about, before, when there were plastics, ubiquitous plastics, if you ate a banana or if you ate anything, you kind of just threw it on the side of the road and, it would biodegrade. And so I just wonder, is this idea of a linear economy, this kind of process of, creating things or consuming things and then disposing of them, is there anybody to blame for that? Or is that just...
I think so. I think we are to blame. Consumers are to blame, because we're asking companies who supply us products to make things that are convenient for us. We want things that are quick and easy, things we can just throw into the microwave and have a dinner in like 5 minutes. And it comes in a plastic container, and we think nothing about throwing that plastic container into the trash, but we should be recycling it. But here's the other thing, is that 70% of the plastic that we use does not get recycled. Even if you throw it in the recycling bin, there's still a cost justification that has to be looked at in terms of, do I recycle this, or is it cheaper for me just to buy new plastic? And the problem is that a lot of industries are dependent on people consuming their products, throwing them away, and replacing them. We've got product obsolescence. We've got people. I mean, here's an example. If you think about the simple thing like a light bulb, when we used to have incandescent light bulbs, you would get more heat than you would light from the light bulb. So people came along with compact fluorescent light bulbs. And that was great because it could produce the right amount of light without the same amount of heat. So therefore, it was more efficient. But it contained mercury. And mercury is a big poison. It's a toxin. You put it in the lake and it contaminates the entire lake. So then we came along with LEDs. But you know, if you go back to the incandescent light bulb, we will think nothing about replacing the light bulb every 6 months because it was disposable and it was cheap. Because we wanted disposable, we wanted cheap. Well, if you go to an airport and you look at the landing lights that they have on the runway, they're not replacing them every 3 months. They've got light bulbs that could last 60 years before they have to be replaced. Why don't we have those? Because we want convenience. We want cheap. We're not prepared to pay $5 for a light bulb. It doesn't make any sense. We're prepared to buy one for 79 cents and replace it every 3 months. But that's ridiculous. But it's in the company's interest to keep selling cheap light bulbs because they've got a volume of business. You know, it's like the medical profession. The medical profession could have a cure for cancer, but they don't because it's more profitable to have a treatment for cancer that people will get. I have to take this product for the rest of my life. I'm not saying I'm an addict, but the reality is I'm hooked on that product for the rest of my life to prevent me getting cancer. Whereas they could have developed something that would avoid people having cancer in the first place. So we've got to change our mindset, the mindset of a business.
I feel like that reminds me of people are always showing, you know, their old Nokia brick phones or something, and how they're still lasting after 30 years. Right. Yeah. But then maybe some of the newer products are, you know, you have to replace them in 2 years. And right. So I wonder if there's in the product space that some companies, I don't know if they're intentionally doing this, but sometimes it seems like it, that they're creating products that will only last for so long.
Well, in particular, the example you use, electronics, we are so used to having every 6 months a new generation of cell phone or computer, and I have to have the latest and greatest because if I don't have it, everybody else has got theirs, and so I'm left behind with technology. And the problem is that, you know, we're hooked on this cycle where the life cycles are getting shorter and shorter. I'll give you a good example of the old days. The old days, we developed a product. It was called the Oreo cookie. I'm sure you're familiar with it. And it's still popular today, even though it's 100 years old, the design of the Oreo cookie. And the reality is, it's been fine for 100 years. Why mess with it? You know, if it's a classic, if it's something good, then there's no reason to change the design or the packaging every 6 months. It doesn't make sense. But in electronics, we've got everybody convinced that if you don't have the latest iPhone or the latest Android, then you're behind the times.
What do you think is a common misconception of the circular economy?
Well, the misconception is this, that you can take every product and convert it back into raw material and get it back to a finished product again. That's not always true. And I'll give an example. If I make, let's just say, a COVID vaccine, and, oh yes, topical, and I inject it into somebody's arm with a syringe, what happens to that syringe? Thrown into a medical waste bucket, and that's taken to an incineration plant, so it's going to be burnt. So the plastic, the needle, everything else that was in, because it could be contaminated with a vaccine, we cannot use it for anything else. We throw it away. So the conception is that why didn't we think about that when we developed the vaccine? Why didn't we think about sterilizing the hypodermic syringe so it could be reused? And we don't think about it that way, and we should. And a lot of companies, especially now with the pandemic, a lot of people are buying stuff from Amazon. It comes in a box. It's a cardboard box. We take that box, we break it down, we put it in the recycle bin, And then what happens to it? We have no idea. We assume that they're going to recycle it, but how much does it get actually recycled?
Mm-hmm.
We've got all these packaging materials that we use once and then we throw away.
Mm-hmm.
And you think about how many trees we're killing every year to create cardboard packaging that is used once.
How do you think that we reconcile the need for sterility and the call to action for reusability? Because, for example, in the food world, I have seen, what do they call it? It's like water that you can eat the packaging for. It's like this kind of jelly pack,
Yeah.
but I haven't actually seen that anywhere. There's all these great ideas, but how do you actually?
Well, what I will say is if you go back 2 generations to my parents and my parents' generation, they were getting their milk delivered in glass bottles to their door every day. They would put out the empties the next day. Those empty bottles would go back to the dairy. They'd be sterilized. They'd be washed. They'd be cleaned. They'd be refilled. They'd put another little metal cap on the top, and it would come back to you. It wasn't single-use plastic. Now, we know that plastic has got a problem because it leaches into the product that is inside the packaging. And so that's not good. And glass is very sterile. And so, yes, you can reuse glass hundreds of times.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no reason why we can't do that. If you think about, even further back in history, when we used to transport products all around the world, tea coming from India would come in a sailing ship. It was wind powered. It wasn't burning fossil fuel. And it would take the trade winds and it would come to wherever it needed to go and unload. So it was good for the environment. We weren't polluting. But today, when you think about how many ships are on the ocean, and 70% of our freight is shipped by ocean freight, and all those ships, they don't have catalytic converters. I mean, they're not protecting the environment. They're burning diesel and fuel oil all the time while they're sitting waiting to get through the Suez Canal because it's blocked. I mean, it's crazy what we're doing. And the other thing that's happening is we are shipping empty containers around the world because they're in the wrong place.
Mm.
And the same thing happens on the roads in America. Like 1 in 4 of the trucks on the road in America are running empty. They have no load. They're just going back to where they came from so they can pick up another load. And we are now shipping entire container ships full of empty containers around the world because they're in the wrong place.
Mm.
So this is a waste.
Mm. Mm. Spoken like a true supply chain.
Everything comes back to supply chain. If your product is not flowing to your customer, then you're creating waste. That waste could be inventory, it could be time delays, it could be the product is expired. How much of that stuff waiting to go through the Suez Canal is on an expiration date? The clock is ticking, and it's going to rot because it's on a ship and it's stuck and it's not going anywhere. That's the problem, that we're losing all that stuff. There's supply chain risk everywhere. There is a long delay in the transmission from product A. I mean, here's an example. In California, we buy oranges, and the oranges are grown in Florida. In Florida, we buy oranges that are grown in California. How many food miles is that? Why are we doing this? It makes no sense whatsoever. Another example, and this is one of my pet peeves, is bottled water. Why on earth are we buying water in bottles, plastic bottles, from Fiji? It makes no sense. We've got, last time I looked, 5 Great Lakes in North America that are full of water. We can have as much water as we want, but the reality is we're importing it in a square bottle from Fiji because it looks pretty.
So we talked a little bit about recycling earlier, but my personal sense as I have grown over time is that recycling isn't the best I think it's kind of a excuse, an alternative to throwing things in the trash, but I wouldn't say it's that much better, because as we've learned with China, a lot of it has just been diverted, and other things that we learn about, for example, donations. Not all donations necessarily just go back to the store and then you buy them. So a lot of them end up in there's like your first tier donation cities or countries, and then your second, third tier. Um, and so I wonder, besides, say, recycling, composting, and I think refurbishing is another kind of way that we can implement a circular economy. What are other methods that companies
Okay,
have?
let me say this. Residential consumer waste is a fraction of the tip of the iceberg. The iceberg is huge. Most of the waste is created in the process that brought that product to you in the first place.
Mm,
And so we can only affect 5% of that waste. The 95% of waste is created in the manufacturing process and the times they make mistakes and the errors and the scrap that is produced in the process. So that we have to work on, and companies have to work on that. It's not the consumer's responsibility to work on that. Consumers can avoid a lot of recycling. And I would say avoidance is the best solution.
mm.
If I buy a memory stick, it's this big, but it comes in a plastic piece that's this big.
And then it's shipped to you in a box that you can
This
fit
big. And
yourself in.
all I wanted was that. And so I have taken to making the company that gave it to me responsible. So what I do is if I go to Best Buy and I buy a memory stick and it comes in the plastic, I say, give me some scissors. And I cut the plastic and I say, take care of this and take care of all this, because I don't want that. All I want is this. And the reason they did that was to stop me walking out of the store with it. So it just makes it more difficult for me to steal it. But the reality is, it's all waste.
So the call to action for listeners is what I'm deducing is just to consume less
Consume
and
less
to
and be very cautious about what you're buying. I'll give you an example. I did a survey for Avon Cosmetics, and what I discovered was with their lip gloss that they were producing, the actual product in the lip gloss was very, a few cents. Most of the cost was associated with packaging because they would put it in a beautiful bottle with a beautiful gold cap in a beautiful looking cardboard container which had gold leaf on it. There was actual gold leaf in the packaging. So the product itself was trivial, but the packaging was very expensive. So you buy the product, you throw the product away, and you recycle the packaging, and you're going to make more money. Right? It's just the reality of what we're buying. We're buying appearance. We're buying aesthetics. We're buying convenience. That's what we're doing. Our parents didn't do that. They would go to the grocery store, and the grocery store would sell them vegetables and fruit one at a time, and they put them in a paper bag, and they would take them home. They weren't individually wrapped. We didn't have the product of people contaminating product, injecting them with cyanide and things that didn't occur to our parents' generation. They would just go and buy things in bulk. But if you look at the world today, you don't want to touch it because who knows who's touched it before you. And I don't want the last lemon on the shelf, so I'm going to not pick the one that everybody else has touched, and I want one that comes in a plastic container. We've got to stop thinking that way. We need to think about what we're buying.
Yeah. Bernie, you have calculated your own carbon footprint before.
Yes.
Is that was something that maybe would be helpful for our listeners to think about as they reflect on their consumption habits?
Yes, that would be a good exercise. They can go online to get the actual formula, but I'll tell you roughly what's involved. So basically, you would calculate how much electricity you use in your house. how many miles you drive, how many miles you would fly, and then also how much oil or whatever you use for heat. So there's like 5 basic things. And the average American, it's 16 tons of carbon per year. And worldwide, the average person is only 4 tons. And when I did my own, I came in at 10 tons. I was basically right in the middle. But, you should be aware of that because that'll tie you in with other bigger picture climate change and being more efficient in what you do. Maybe don't drive as far, maybe buy a carbon offset. If you do have to fly an airplane or do like Greta did, take a racing boat across the ocean. But most people can't do that. So they'll have to fly, but they can be efficient about it and just be aware of it. And there's ways you can do offsets too.
Sure.
And that leads me to a point, because I'm glad you brought that up. But you talked about the amount of carbon we create in a year. But I looked at the cost or the amount of waste that we produce in a year. And I was surprised to find out that Canada is leading the world. I lived in Canada for 17 years. I thought they were pretty environmentally aware, but they are leading the world in metric tons of waste per year. And it's 36.1 metric tons per person per year in Canada. It's amazing. The USA, by contrast, is number 3. Number 2 is Bulgaria. For some reason, Bulgaria is number 2. 26.7 metric tons per person per year. And in the US, it's 25.9 metric tons per year. And of course, there are places like Africa where they have very, very low numbers, but our averages are very high in America.
Do you think that for Canada, I wonder if it's a colder climate, you probably are using more? Well, I don't know.
I don't think so. I think that 75% of the waste is produced in the industrial, building, residential sectors, agriculture. So there's a lot of agriculture in Canada. There's a lot of industry. There's a lot of tar sands exploration. There's a lot of waste that's created as a result of that process. So I think that's what's skewing it. They have a lot, they don't have the population. They only have 1/10 of the population of the United States. But the reality is they have a lot of industrial processes that are fairly wasteful, I would say.
Yeah, no, actually, I think you make a good point there because the exploitation of natural resources is often probably a way that common people like ourselves notice these kinds of things like pollution in the rivers or etc. But once that goes away, like here in Maine, we see our rivers clear up and then in some ways we think that the problem is no longer here, but it's only shifted somewhere else.
Right, exactly. Yep.
Keith, what is one last thing you would like our listeners to take away as they reflect on Earth Day being every day?
The fact that I've lived as long as I've lived, I've seen when we've been much more careful about the environment. I was riding my bicycle the other day. That was environmentally good. I wasn't taking my car, riding my bicycle. And I looked at the side of the road and I saw the kinds of things that were lying by the side of the road. It's amazing. People today are driving a car and they're thinking nothing of opening the window and tossing out of the window anything that they've consumed on that journey. It's insane to see the amount of trash that we throw out of our windows. We're throwing trash everywhere. We're throwing it into the land, we're throwing it into the rivers, it goes into the ocean, and we're even shipping our trash into outer space. It doesn't make any sense because all that stuff is valuable. It could be reused. We could mine our landfills. There's gold in our landfills. There are 35 million computers thrown away every year in America. Each one of those has gold on the printed circuit boards. And that could all be reclaimed and reused, but it's not. It's thrown away. So we've got to think more about the circular economy, and we've got to have businesses that are set up to recycle products back into the raw materials so that they can be reused. I think of things like lithium-ion batteries and the amount of pollution that's caused because we're disposing of those toxic chemicals into the environment, whereas we could be recycling them and making those into new products, new batteries. And we're not doing that. So that's what I think is we need to think more about the circular economy and less about the linear economy.
Thank you, Keith, for joining us here on Scientifically Speaking.
Absolutely. Okay, my pleasure.
You have been listening to Scientifically Speaking here on WMPG with myself, Bernie, and Keith Launchbury. From your favorite nerds, mask up, and we wish you healthy bodies and clean air.